This is the My Campaign Coach podcast, where we talk about how to win elections. Every week, we let you hear straight from the best consultants, operatives, and candidates in the game, all for one reason, to help you win. For more information about how we can help you win, visit mycampaigncoach.com. Now, here's your host, Raj Schaefer.
Welcome to the How to Run for Office podcast from My Campaign Coach. Thank you to Campaign Sidekick for supporting us in this podcast. I've been involved with Campaign Sidekick for 5 years, and they're the only platform that I use or recommend. My teams have knocked over $250,000 doors in the program, and that's actually only a small fraction of the voter contacts that they've logged. It's fast, it's reliable, and many of our guests have used it to great effect. Visit campaignsidekick.vote to schedule a demo and find out what they can offer your campaign. This week, we're continuing our time in Cruz world, and I wouldn't blame you for wondering if we're turning into the Cruz Campaign podcast, but that's not quite our plan. The fact is that I've spent years in the trenches with these guys and have seen up close and personally how good they are at what they do, and they've just been kind enough to come on here and share some of their experiences with us. Jon McClellan is a proud Baylor Bear and an alumni of a long list of successful races here in Texas. He's worked in the Capitol for Governor Perry, and 7 years ago he was brought on as the number 4 hire to the Ted Cruz for Senate campaign. Following Cruz's election to the United States Senate, Jon served as a statewide outreach director and later as a regional political director on Ted's presidential campaign. Today, he's the director of outreach for Public Blueprint, where he helps craft and deploy creative strategies in the arena of public and government affairs, as well as grassroots organizing and digital advocacy. Jon lives in Sugar Land, Texas, with his bride Sarah and beautiful daughter Mary Beth. Mr. McClellan, welcome.
Thank you, Raz. Happy to be here.
It's a pleasure, man. It's always good to talk to you. And especially when we get to talk about Senator Cruz and the fun that we had over the last 7 years. I cannot believe it's been that long. It hurt to write that.
We're getting old, Raz. We're getting old.
Oh my gosh! Wow. Yeah, it's been a fast-paced 7 years. You know, I've got to spend a lot of it closely working together, and at least even when I was doing PAC stuff, you were doing campaign stuff. At least we were working on the same cause. So we worked closely for a long time. We
couldn't talk though, but we knew that we were both supporting the good cause.
That's right. We were bound in spirit. That's for sure. Let's talk out a little bit before that. Go back a bit longer than 7 years ago, and kind of tell a little bit about your story and how you got interested in politics, hooked on it, and how it became a profession for you.
Yeah. So I grew up in Houston and Sugar Land, Texas, where my wife and I now live down in Fort Bend County, which is a pretty politically active and engaged area on the Republican conservative side. And so in high school, I was always, watching the news, watching current events, and knew I was interested in politics. And my dad really convinced me to try to get some real world experience in high school to see if that was something I wanted to major in college when I went to Baylor. And so my senior year of high school, I interned for my local mayor, Mayor David Wallace of Sugar Land, Texas, on his reelection campaign. And he was running unopposed, so of course he won. And
that's my favorite kind of race.
Yeah, it was the best kind of race. That was the first race I ever worked on. And I thought it was the coolest thing ever. Like, hey, my first internship, my first race, we won. Now, granted, the guy was unopposed, but at the time, I didn't really know how big of a deal that was.
100% win rate, baby.
Yeah, 100% win rate going into college. So that was pretty good. So on that race, I helped out his campaign manager, who I think was his only, paid staff, with finance. I remember, filing and scanning a whole bunch of checks and making some phone calls and helping them with some communications work and yard signs, of course, too, and bumper stickers and all the fun ground game stuff. And so, I kind of got the bug then and realized, hey, this is really fun. I should look into doing this in college. And went to Baylor University and did a bunch of internships and majored in political science there. One of the more fun things I did while interning at Baylor was working for Van Taylor. At the time, Van was a congressional candidate in a targeted race running against Chet Edwards, who finally was knocked off a couple years later by Bill Flores. But at the time, that was one of the top 5 hottest congressional races in the country, getting national attention. We had Dick Cheney come in for events. We did fundraisers with Bush and Cheney and a whole bunch of national figures. So it gave me a really great experience working on the ground, doing grassroots organizing, outreach, block walking, phone banking, and just basically helping run a local grassroots office, working with volunteers and getting them engaged. So that was a lot of fun, and seeing how a congressional campaign can get a lot of national attention, and seeing all the big money that was being spent, the advertising, the mail, and just learning a little bit more about the professional work that goes into a campaign, not just the pizza, the beer, and the block walking and phone banking. So that was a lot of fun, and I also worked for our local county party, the McLennan County Republican Party there in Waco, Texas. We had a great county chairman, M.A. Taylor, who was a longtime county chairman there in McLennan County, and him and his wife Virginia kind of took me under their wing and taught me how you can organize a local county party and what the ins and outs of that means. And they also, for the first time, I ever read the Republican Party of Texas and the National Republican Party platform. One of my first days on the job, they sat me down with 2 thick binders and said, "You say you're a Republican. Well, here's the platform. Why don't you read the darn thing and then come back and talk to me and make sure you're still a Republican after you read these things?" And I had never actually sat down and read the Republican Party of Texas platform or the platform of our national party. So that was a unique experience for me, seeing how long and interesting some of our platform documents are. And then
what a nerd.
And then using that experience later on in life now when we are trying to influence what the national platform says or what the state platform says, it's unique that I first learned about that all the way back in Baylor when I was probably a sophomore or junior at Baylor University, not knowing what a platform was, what it meant, and why it was important to the grassroots, activists across the state. When I was at Baylor University, some of my friends were involved in politics as well, and they got hooked up with the Governor Mike Huckabee's presidential campaign during the 2008 cycle in the Republican primary. And so 2 of my friends, Vincent Harris and Jordan Powell, who are both still active in politics today, were up in Arkansas working for Governor Huckabee. And I basically called them and said, "Hey, tell your employers that your friend from Baylor is driving up. He'll be here tomorrow and put in the work." And so I literally showed up at their headquarters in Arkansas. Some guy from Texas had just been in the car for 2 days in a row, and they put me to work in Arkansas for a couple of weeks and realized that I had half a brain and 2 legs and 2 arms. And so they then put me in a car and I drove myself all the way up to Iowa. And it was me and 3 or 4 people living in some tiny, really run-down apartment complex in the middle of Des Moines, Iowa. I was sleeping on air mattresses, working for Governor Huckabee's presidential campaign back in 2008. And if y'all remember, we had the Huckaboom or the Huckabee boom in the Iowa presidential primary, and Iowa is key to Republican politics in a presidential year. And so I got my first taste of a real world, hands-on presidential campaign working for Governor Huckabee in 2008 in Iowa. I was up there for the summer, for a couple of months during the summer, went back to Baylor to do the semester at Baylor, and then went back up over Christmas break for a week or 2 to help him out right before the Iowa caucuses. One of the great experiences of that summer was doing the Iowa straw poll. And then later on in my life, about 2 years ago with the Cruz for President campaign, this current cycle, we had some discussions about the Iowa straw poll, and it was I found it pretty unique and amusing that, my experience with Governor Huckabee in the Iowa straw poll back in, 2005, 2006, and then how that relates almost 10 years later for the 2018 election cycle and how it's all still going on and still important. And that's a whole nother story to talk about on a later issue about the Iowa straw poll and the Cruz for President Iowa operation. But I found it quite amusing that some college kid, had experience in Iowa 10 years ago and is now using that experience on behalf of Cruz for President, 10 years later with a real job and a real paycheck and real responsibility. And I also learned, just the importance of the grassroots, though, while working for Governor Huckabee in Iowa back in 2008. Huckabee was a underfunded, candidate, did not have the national establishment behind him, did not have the media or the money behind him, but he was a real folksy guy. He could really relate well, and he could really speak well to the grassroots base, especially a evangelical conservative base that Iowa has. And so I traveled with him all across the state and saw him hold ice cream socials with 5 or 10 people all across the state. And in some towns in Iowa, 5 or 10 people is a really big crowd if you're a Republican politician. So we, traveled all across the state. I really picked up a lot on the skills of retail politics and to what to look in a candidate that is good at retail politics. What I saw in Governor Huckabee, I saw years later in Senator Cruz when I decided to go work for his campaign, when I post-college. So anyone out here listening that is looking to get some great volunteer experience in them, I highly encourage them to call up a presidential campaign, tell them you're showing up the next day at their headquarters, prove your worth to them, and they'll ship you off to Iowa or New Hampshire or South Carolina. And there's no better political process or political experience than experiencing a tier 1 presidential campaign on the ground in an early primary state like Iowa. It's a priceless experience, especially for a good old boy from Texas who, had seen snow early on in his childhood, but had been out of the snow and cold weather for about 15 years. It was quite a shocker to be walking around in my cowboy boots and a suit, freezing my butt off up there in Iowa. But it was well worth it.
You bring up a really good point, and it's a common theme through many of our guests on here. It's that you're coming from a background where you're policy outcome focused, so you're looking at principles and the things that these men and women stand for that you're fighting for. That's what you're looking to first, not their viability, not where they're from, not whether they're male or female. It's that they want to fight for conservative principles. And so that's a fundamental issue for you as far as how you look at campaigns. And second is that you put in a lot of work early, not just through your internships, in high school, but through college. And it was something where you spent a lot of time offering to do whatever would help the campaign. And that's something where maybe it's just part of this millennial thing. Maybe it's just the way every generation is. But a lot of people that I talk to, young folks that are in high school or college that want to be working in politics, they feel like they're going to come out of college and get right on TV, or they're going to come out of college and get right on to a paid campaign gig because they're geniuses, or I don't know. It differs from person to person as far as why they think that. But the fact is, at least in my experience and that of a lot of the people that have been on here and yourself, is that you got to go out there and work. You got to offer to do what it takes. That's block walking, emptying the trash, carrying signs around Iowa, walking in parades, making phone calls. And that's something that obviously worked very, very well for you. That's not an accident, is it?
No, that is definitely not an accident. And I grew up in a suburban middle class family, but my dad taught me the value of hard work, and he actually sent my brother and I to a coal mine in West Virginia one summer while we were both at Baylor, as kind of a friendly reminder and warning that if you screw up, this can be your life. You're not going to fail because
wow.
I'll make sure that you get a job, but it's going to be on a strip mine in West Virginia.
Oh my gosh.
So it's not going to be in your cushy office space that you're currently sitting in.
That's awesome.
I always respected the value of hard work, and I saw that it worked for my family, it worked for my dad, it worked for my brother, it worked for my sister, and has worked for me so far as well. And that's one thing I would stress, whether you're a candidate running for office, you're an intern, you're a campaign manager, you're a mid-level guy. No job is too big or too small for you to do in a campaign, and especially in a campaign where everything has to be done now. It doesn't matter, if you're the campaign manager, the candidate, the intern, or the finance director raising millions of bucks. If there's something that needs to be taken care of now that's outside of your scope or your job description, who cares? Go and do it, because the end result is that you're moving the ball forward for your candidate. That means that your candidate has a heck of a lot better chance of winning come election day, and that's what this is all about, and that's what really matters. And that's one thing that I've always taken to heart, and the folks that I've chosen to work with and surround myself with all feel that way as well. A great example here at my current job at Public Blueprint, we were part of a South by Southwest unofficial party, or let me rephrase that. We were part of a party that was going on while South by Southwest was happening for a client of ours, and the two founders of the firm I work for, they were out there helping bus tables because, we had a whole bunch of people coming into our party to meet our client, selling product, and some of our tables had too many, paper towels, plates, and beverage cups, lined up. So they're out there busting the table, and that's just a great way to show leadership and set an example of how things should get done on a campaign or in your professional life. No job too big or too small. And I will say that your bosses and the folks that you're trying to impress when you're working on a campaign, they notice that kind of stuff because they're in a position they are today because they did that in their first job. They did that in their second job. And they still do that today. That's why they're successful.
So coming out of Baylor, you got your political science degree. You've got a really enormous amount of internship experience helping out through high school and college. And now you're looking for a job. What does that look like for you?
Yeah, so that was a little nerve-wracking for me. None of my family's in politics. My brother is in oil and gas. My dad's in oil and gas and coal, clean coal, not dirty coal, though. And so we didn't really have any family ties or family connections like some folks do that get involved in politics. So really, I just sent my resume to every single person I had met working on internships, every professor at Baylor I had a poli-sci class with, every person I met on, Van Taylor's campaign, some really great guys. They're like Casey and Lonnie Dietz who've helped me out a lot over the years. And somehow my resume got down to Austin and got into a hands of a consultant named Todd Olson. And Todd was the consultant for Supreme Court Justice Dale Wainwright's reelection campaign for the Texas Supreme Court. Here in Texas, we elect everyone from our dog catcher up to our governor, including all of our judges and all of our Texas Supreme Court judges. And so I got a call out of the blue, I think about 2 weeks before I graduated, saying, hey, John, this is Todd Olson. I want you to come down and interview for a race I'm working. I was like, oh, awesome. Thanks, man. And so came down and met Judge Wainwright and Sherry Whitus, who was his campaign manager, and Todd Olson and the rest of the gang. And that was my first, real big-time paid job in politics, was being, I think I was the field director, I think they called me. As you know, titles are free in politics, and I think I got a pretty good title for having, very limited experience. And so I was a field director for Justice Wainwright's reelection campaign back in the 2008 cycle. So he was unopposed in the primary, and then he was opposed in the general election by a Democrat that just happened to be named Sam Houston. So that was interesting. Where
it's
a
good ballot name.
Yeah, that's when I learned the importance of your ballot name. And so in that race, a lot of what we did was go around to all the established, Tea Party, conservative, TFRW groups across the state, and go talk to them about who Judge Wainwright is and what he wants to do for our state and why he should be reelected. As you know, there is not a lot of interest in judicial races here in Texas, whether they're a JP's race locally or a statewide race like Judge Wainwright. And so we had to go to the engaged base of the Republican Party, the ones that were already going to be going and voting, making sure that they know, why should Judge Wainwright be reelected, and what is how he's qualified and what he stands for. And that's also when I learned the influence of lawyers and law firms in elections, because who really cares about a judicial race? Now, you and me do, because we're weirdos, but the general public doesn't care that much about judicial races. And so we had to go to the kind of the small groups that really do care about it. And so that was my introduction into the kind of the FedSaw conservative legal society world that care about, judicial races in Texas, and learning about that whole process of how lawyers and law firms play a really big role in getting folks elected up and down the ballot, especially on judicial races.
So coming out of college, you already had incredible experience on campaigns, from Iowa to the Sugar Land mayor's office. You got on Wainwright's reelection campaign, and so that takes you through the 2008 cycle, and then you ended up working in the Capitol, right?
Yes, so I after I got done with Justice Wainwright's successful reelection campaign in the 2008 cycle, once again 100% win rate for Jon McClellan right out of college. I was pretty pumped about that. So I jumped into a state representative named Wayne Christian from Deep East Texas. He's from Center, Texas, which is in Shelby County, which is pretty much as close to the Louisiana border as you can get while still being in Texas. And at that time, Wayne was a very conservative member of the Texas House. And he was very outspoken, was leading the charge on conservative issues. And I went into his office as a legislative aide. And how I got into his office was on the Van Taylor for Congress campaign that I interned at Baylor. His daughter, Liza Christian, was working. I think she was the operations manager, making sure the ship was running on time, and she did that very well. And so that was her father, and we had stayed in touch, throughout post-college and post-college. She's a fellow Baylor Bear as well. And so I had called her up along with probably a couple hundred other people when I was looking for my next job. And I was, hey, Liza, your dad's a state rep. He's a conservative. I'm a conservative. We went to Baylor together. Let's, put me in touch. And so she introduced me to her dad. I went and interviewed with him, and it was a pretty good fit. And that started my, almost decade-long personal and professional relationship with Wayne Christian. I started out as a legislative aide in the Texas House of Representatives during the 81st legislative session. And so it was a pretty fun time being a conservative in Texas politics during session. That was my first session ever working. I never had the opportunity to come intern there during college. Looking back, I wish I did. So I'd encourage anyone out there that's in school right now, if you have a chance to go work, whether it's an internship or an entry-level job in the Texas legislature, go do it. It's awesome. Great experience. You're drinking from a fire hose for 5 months straight, but it's one of the best experiences of your life, and you get a ton of free food. So you'll put on the freshman 15 or the Texas Ledge 15 as well, as I unfortunately know. So I started with Wayne, though, as his legislative director, and then shortly into the session, we had a little bit of a staff shakeup, which tends to happen in offices when session gets going and everyone is trying to fill out their new roles and figure out how they can be most helpful to to their representative. And so I ended up being the legislative director about halfway through the session, and then the legislative director was promoted to the chief of staff, who was David White, who is actually my current boss now on here at Public Blueprint. And so they threw us into the fire. It was sink or swim, and luckily we swam with a little help from Wayne Christian, who just knows the political scene and knows the process so well. and then from some really good folks around the Capitol that worked there, or lawyers and lobbyists that kind of took us under their wing. They were all part of the conservative movement and made sure we had the tools and resources we needed to be successful and push Representative Wayne Christian's legislative agenda. And it was a great session. Learned a heck of a lot. Learned about being kind of a conservative, and Wayne used to be in leadership, and then due to some political movement, he was no longer in leadership, and so it was unique, working with a conservative leader who was kind of on the outside of the mainstream of the party, at least during the 81st legislative session, and it was a lot of fun. We tried to utilize social media and different unique tools to get Wayne's message out there and to get the conservative message out there, and it was a heck of a 6 months. And then after that, David White, who was the chief of staff in Wayne's office, got an offer to go be the political director for Governor Rick Perry's reelection campaign back in 2010. And so when he broke that news to us, I pulled him aside and said, "Hey, David, you got to take me with you, man. Like, Governor Perry's awesome. Take me over there." And so I grabbed onto David as hard as I could, and I literally forced him. Hopefully he said he did it because I earned it and was good at my job. But I forced him to take me over to Governor Perry's reelection campaign during the 2010 cycle, and that's where I served as a field staff for Governor Rick Perry in 2010, covering Central Texas. So I covered about 25 different counties. And the great news is, unlike all my colleagues that were field staff all across the state, I was based out of their Austin headquarters in the historic Vaughn building in downtown Austin. And so I had a chance to not only meet and network and watch, learn from all of the staff on the Perry campaign, from Rob Johnson, the campaign manager, to Dave Carney, the chief strategist, to their pollsters and the media folks, the press folks, the finance folks, the outreach team. So it was a really good experience for me, learning how to run a field operation within my assigned counties, run block walks and phone banks and do outreach and seek endorsements and do events and advance and throw events that are essentially on a presidential level, because Governor Perry was a sitting governor of Texas. He had his DPS protection, so you couldn't just throw him into a restaurant and hope for the best. You had to have everything all planned and staffed and advanced out. So that was a really good learning experience. And just being a part of the greater team in the Austin office and the headquarters, learning from all these really smart guys and gals that have been doing this for decades, was just an unbelievable experience. And one of the biggest lessons I learned on the governor's reelection campaign in 2010 was to not make bets with your boss. And if you do make a bet with your boss, don't bet shaving your head. Because I lost a bet to my boss, David White, related to the campaign. And so I had to shave my head down to it was a bare bones cut. And we actually got it all on video, and they put a pretty funny video out. But I lost a fundraising challenge to David. At the end of it, the bet was who can raise the most money in a 24-hour period for Governor Perry as part of one of his money cannons or money bombs that we would do every quarter or so, right before the Texas Ethics Commission fundraising deadline. And so I ended up raising less amount of dollars, but because I'm a grassroots guy, I had a more individual donors. So I thought that was a win, because I brought in more small dollar donors to the campaign. David, being David, had less donors, but a substantially higher dollar amount. And so he won the terms of the bet, but I feel like I did the most value for the campaign.
Absolutely.
Building up their small dollar donor list and getting my head shaved in the process. So if you're going to bet on campaigns, bet dinner or a drink or something else stupid, but don't bet your hair, because sometimes it doesn't grow back.
I think that's probably what happened with David, but you still got yours, so that's good. I think you win the long run on that one, that's for sure. Now, when you're on that campaign, this was your first time being a big organization of a campaign. You'd been on a statewide before with Wainwright, but it's because of the way that those judicial races run in Texas, it's usually a small team. You were out a lot, you got to do a lot, but this is a very different experience being part of a statewide team in Texas running that level, top of the ticket race. Talk a little bit about that and kind of how that race shaped up and the role you played there. Because that was we've talked about this some before as far as, how it relates to Senator Cruz's election and with the governor spot, with the contested race, was KBH running for that. So this is a situation where you've got a sitting senator running against a sitting governor he's on track to become the longest serving governor in a historic term in office. What was that like? It was definitely a unique race.
Definitely. So at the time when I was joining the race, it was early in the 2010 cycle. I think I was with Governor Perry for almost a little less than 2 years, which in campaign world, that is a heck of a long time. So they recognized that they had a huge fight in their hand, and so they staffed up early. Literally right after the legislative session ended, right after they were free from all of that, they staffed up, and we all jumped over from our various legislative offices over to the campaign world. And at the time, Governor Perry was running for re-election, and Senator Kay Bailey Hutchinson, who was literally the most popular Republican elected official in Texas, U.S. Senator, huge national profile, had done a whole lot of work and good for the state of Texas, kind of an old school Texas politician kind of model, what you would say right there. When you think of an LBJ or a Governor Clements or any of those old school Texas politicians that have a great name, a great reputation, and a ton of influence across the state, Senator Hutchinson fit into that mold and was a very very good and respected politician in her own right. And so we were, ironically enough, the underdogs. Sitting Texas Governor Rick Perry was the underdog in his own reelection campaign against a sitting U.S. senator. And so, we knew we were going to have a long, hard, tough battle. But that's what kind of drew myself and my colleagues into that race was, we lived for that. We wanted that experience. We wanted to be there on the front lines of the battle fighting. We didn't want to be hanging out over in agency land or state land, while all of our friends were out there campaigning on the hardest race in the nation. Definitely the hardest race in Texas, and one of the hardest races in the nation that cycle. And so we all wanted to be a part of the fight, and so we jumped headlong into the fight. And my role was very small and limited. I had my scope, I had my field of my 25 counties that I was responsible. We did a grassroots program called Perry Home Headquarters. That was a big project of the chief consultant, Dave Carney. And so what a Perry Home Headquarter was a single person that agreed to serve as a Perry Home Headquarter, and they pledged that they would go find, I believe it was 10 or 12 of their friends, family, supporters to go vote for Governor Perry. But the really cool thing is on the back end of our website, we could track all of that. And so my Perry Home Headquarters, they had a unique recruitment link that they could send out to all their friends and family, and their friends and family would sign up on the back end of our website, and we would get all of their data, all their information, so we can verify that they're actually registered voters. Or if they're not a registered voter, we know we got to send them a voter registration card or bug them until they get registered. And so that's how we kind of did the grassroots operation. And then one level above the Perry Home Headquarters were our part-time field staff. And so we had the authorization as young 20-something-year-old field staffers to hire people to work for us directly without having any overhead, or without having to get approval or red tape from David White, our political director, or any higher-ups in the Austin office, in the headquarters office. So that was pretty awesome. We were given a lot of leeway to work, and we could go out there and hire these part-time field staff, and they were paid on a recruitment, a recruitment fee, meaning that for every Perry Home Headquarter they recruited, they got a set X amount of dollars, and that was unlimited. So if you had some guys that were really hustlers, they were getting bigger checks than I was per month as a full-time salaried healthcare employee, because they were out there just hustling it, getting their friends, their family, their churches, their sports leagues, their fraternities or sororities or social clubs signed up to support Governor Perry. And on the back end, we could track all of that and verify the data to make sure that these were indeed real people, not the starting lineup for the Houston Texans or the Dallas Cowboys, or not Mickey Mouse. And we could verify, their email, their phone, their address, if they're registered voters. If they're not, we got to get them registered by this deadline. And so it was my first time seeing, number one, how a grassroots campaign is done, in your little county, in your region, and then how that applies across the state. Then also how a data-driven campaign really watches your metrics. And early on in politics, a lot of what I saw was shaking hands and kissing babies and putting out yard signs and going to go speak to clubs. All important things. But you have to have the data and the metrics behind that to make sure you're talking to the right people and your message is working, and that you're truly getting new voters every single day. You're not just talking to the same people. And so we had daily, weekly, monthly, and quarterly goals that as a field staffer we had to hit in our region. So it was a really it was a little cutthroat, right? If we didn't hit our metrics, we knew before we signed on to the campaign that if we didn't hit our metrics over a certain amount of period of time, we would be let go. And we joined the campaign knowing that, and we had 10 field staff positions that were filled. There were 5 of us that lasted the whole campaign from day one all the way through the general election day. And I don't know if I should say this or not, but we jokingly behind the scenes call ourselves the Dream Team, because we survived that very long and tough election cycle. And every month, every week, every quarter, every day, hit our recruitment goals of Perry home headquarters and of actual voters to go vote for Governor Perry. In the end, it was successful. In the primary election, we defeated Senator Hutchinson, and it was very successful in the general election as well when we defeated the former Houston Mayor Bill White, who was a pretty formidable Democrat opponent as well.
That was one of my first races back here in Texas, because I graduated in 2009, was back here, and one of the first races that I got to watch up close and personal, with knowing you and knowing some of those other guys on the campaign with David and others. And it taught me a whole lot, because as far as statewide races here in Texas, because there hadn't been a whole lot of contests there at the top of the ticket, we hadn't seen a whole lot of examples of how data and social media and a lot of these new tools that were evolving were going to be used. And the way you guys really deployed those with Johnson and Carney and David and yourself and y'all's team, you really did such a fantastic job. And I think that paved the way really well for the work that you did when you came around to Cruz's campaign. I think that probably laid a lot of groundwork, and I taught you a lot of stuff that did you very well in those roles.
It definitely did, and one thing I forgot to mention with Governor Perry that is very similar to Senator Cruz. They are both retail politicians, just like Governor Huckabee back in Iowa in 2008. I mean, these guys know how to work a crowd, they know how to speak to a crowd, and they know how to relate to somebody one-on-one. And so, whether I was working for Huckabee, Perry, or then candidate Ted Cruz, we knew if we could get them in front of a crowd of 5 people or 5,000 people, the vast majority of those people will walk out of that room voting for our boss, voting for a guy, giving them money, and volunteering for them on a grassroots level. And so it was our job to create those opportunities to get a chance to talk to a group of interested voters. And so, with the lessons learned all the way going back from high school, I learned that working for a unopposed race is always the best. And throughout college and throughout my first couple of paid jobs here in Austin, working in Texas politics, all of that led to me being hired on really early onto Ted Cruz's U.S. Senate campaign. When he was a long shot nobody that no one had ever heard of before, running against the sitting lieutenant governor of Texas and a couple other really powerful Texas politicians that had a wide basis. And so I think you just did an interview with John Drogan, who was the campaign manager of Ted Cruz for U.S. Senate. And so I had known Drogan through working in Texas politics. We'd never working together, but we'd always working in the same circle and kind of casually knew each other. And so one day when I was actually back in Representative Wayne Christian's office for the 82nd legislative session, I was his chief of staff then. I got a Facebook message near the end of session from Drogan, in typical Drogan fashion, not like small talking or BS and catching up. Hey, good to see you. It was just straight up. Do you know someone who would be a good fit for a political director for Ted Cruz? I was like, oh, interesting. So I replied back, yes. Me. And that's how I got my job as being the political director for Ted Cruz for U.S. Senate in 2012, which was pretty ironic. But so after that, Jurgen and I exchanged messages. We got together and met and talked about it. I had a really awkward informal interview with Ted Cruz at the time. It was still during the legislative session, and in typical House staffer fashion. Every Friday, we all wore wacky ties because that's what all the cool kids in the Texas Capitol were doing. So I had on some really nasty Jerry Garcia tie that was pink and purple. I got it as a Christmas or birthday gift from my Aunt Pam, who lives in New York, who's a little bit wild and crazy. She's definitely fills in on the Democrat side of the McClellan family. So she sent me this tie. I don't know if it was a gag gift or just she thought my style was too boring. I need to brighten it up a little bit. So I'm wearing this tie, having a good laugh out of it. And then suddenly I got a call from Drogan like, hey, man, Ted's in town for work. Can you pick us up and drive us to the airport, get a chance to meet him and have an informal talk? Like, oh, shoot. And so I had to I went and picked up Ted Cruz in my car that I ended up driving him all across the state in that exact same car, just a couple months later. But had a good informal conversation with him and apparently got him and Drogan's blessing despite my terrible, god-awful, ugly pink and purple Jerry Garcia tie that my Aunt Pam from New York gave me, and somehow it worked out. And I also had to go and talk with Jason Johnson, who was Cruz's chief strategist on the Senate race all the way through the presidential race, and had a really good talk with him and Drogan. And one thing that he asked me that still stands out to me today is, and I could already tell this was going to be a good race to work for because Jason asked me, this is going to be a grassroots race. We're going to need the grassroots to win. Who do you think are the key grassroots leaders right now, across the state? And so that kind of stumped me. That wasn't a normal interview question that I had prepared for. And so I was kind of racking my brain, and a name came to mind. Joanne Fleming of Deep East Texas and Tyler with We the People Tyler came to my mind. So I mentioned Joanne because I got to know her a little bit during working for Representative Wayne Christian's office. She and kind of the Tea Party network in Texas had been getting really active during the 81st and 82nd legislative sessions, trying to influence legislation and get their conservative agenda to pass. And so I kind of mentioned, I said, well, I think Joanne Fleming from Tyler is probably one of the most influential Tea Party leaders right now. And Jason and Jorgen gave me a long look and a slow nod and didn't comment on it at all. But apparently it was the right answer because I got the job. So I never told that to Joanne. So if she's listening, Joanne, thank you. You helped me get one of my big breaks in Texas politics. So I appreciate it.
Joanne's awesome. She's just good people. And right. You were 100% right. She's one of the most influential conservative leaders here in the state and continues to do great stuff. So that was a good one to pull out of the hat. Well done.
It was.
So you got the job, and we're early on the Cruz campaign. You're at probably June, July of 2011, right?
Yep.
And so you're setting to work. You're the number 4 hire on a small team that doesn't have to get big. As we talked to Drogan, you had to, one, establish viability, and you guys started off that first year, the first quarter, raising $1 million before you got on board. Now you've got to come out and make sure that you guys are the clear conservative choice. And so at that point, you were starting to get a couple endorsements from Madison Project and Senate Conservatives and Club for Growth around that time. And you needed to go really step out and nail down the fact that Ted was the conservative fighter in the race. So you had to win that kind of sub-primary, as Drogan talked about it, where you've got Michael Williams and a bunch of these guys running, and y'all need to stand out. A lot of that was based, as Jason Drogan talked about, on getting those grassroots conservative leaders like Joanne, like Toby Marie Walker, and others on board as your advocates. You were largely in charge of that, right?
That's correct. I mean, it was a team effort led by Ted Cruz all the way down the chain. But one of my early jobs that I was charged with is to go out to the grassroots base here in Texas, identify the leaders, whether they're Tea Party leaders, TFRW leaders, county chairs, SRIC members, anyone that had influence within Republican circles here in Texas, and go talk to them about Ted, go get Ted to talk to them about himself, go speak to their clubs, and try to get their support and their formal endorsement in this Republican primary. And as we all know, our friends, whether they're Tea Party friends or TFRW or Republican leaders, they don't endorse easily in a Republican primary, especially one that is as hot as that race was multiple candidates. The sitting lieutenant governor of Texas running, along with numerous other candidates, all professional campaigns, good politicians, good people with good teams around them. And so it was definitely a heavy lift, but we had the best salesman in the history of Texas politics, Ted Cruz. And so we quickly realized that, I could call, Jochen could call, friends on the outside like you, Rads, could help us call and get introductions and meetings set up. But our job was essentially to kind of, identify who the leaders were, make the early calls, kind of warm the water a little bit, and then drop in Ted Cruz, and he would take it from there and win that endorsement. And so what we ended up doing early on in the race was literally he jumped in my truck and I drove him all across the state of Texas. I'm talking not just the Texas Triangle of Dallas, Houston, and San Antonio, but to East Texas, to South Texas, Central Texas, Panhandle, Northeast Texas, Hill Country. We drove literally anywhere where there was a group of 5 people or more that would meet us. And so we had meetings, in IHOP in Dallas with 5 or 6 Tea Party leaders until 2 a.m. And then I had to drive, Ted back to Austin or back to Houston that night after that. I still remember meeting with, Jim and Robin Lennon and Dale and Mary Holtz of the Clear Lake Tea Party down there in Houston, I think at a Good Company barbecue off of I-10 in the outskirts of Houston, and meeting with them late one evening and some of the Tea Party leaders that they brought on board. And so we did that for, 6 months to a year, going all across the state, having personal one-on-one meetings with these key influencers and key leaders within the Republican and conservative movement and seeking their endorsements. And then what we did pretty successfully was, I'm sure Jorgen talked about this, we tried to show a snowball effect. So every day, every week, every month, every quarter, on the fundraising side, on the national endorsement side, on the big-time state endorsement side, then on the grassroots side, we tried to show a snowball effect where every week there's a new press release, every month there's a new big announcement coming from us showing we've raised X amount of money, we've gotten this great national endorsement, or we've gotten this great state and local endorsement, trying to show that, hey, today we have 10 Tea Party leaders. Next week we'll release 50 Tea Party leaders. Week after that, we're going to release 100 Tea Party leaders, and then we switch over to the TFRW leaders. Texas Federation of Republican Women is one of the most powerful political organizations in Texas, I would say in the country. They put in so many campaign hours across the state for candidates up and down the ballot. And TFRW, as a statewide and local organization, cannot and does not endorse in a Republican primary. However, their individual leaders and members are allowed to endorse with their personal name. And so what we did is we targeted them as well. Anywhere from, the club presidents couldn't endorse due to their bylaws, but the former presidents could endorse, or the vice presidents could endorse, or the program chair, or the Americanism chair, or whatever it was, could endorse. And so we went after thousands of TFRW ladies all across the state to get them to endorse Ted Cruz. And so then the same process we did with this Tea Party leaders list that endorsed Ted, we did it with these TFRW ladies, where we released a list of 5 or 10 endorsements. Then we did 50, then we did 100, then we did 500, whatever that final number was. And that really showed momentum among our grassroots conservative base. And people pay attention to that care about politics enough to look at Ted Cruz and the other candidates running early on in that Republican primary and figure out who is the conservative candidate, who's getting the conservative endorsements, and who is truly being the grassroots candidate. And we did the hard work very early on in that race to do that, where we proved ourselves that we are the grassroots candidate and we are the conservative candidate. And we owned that, we proved it, and it turned out to be successful. But it was a heck of a lot of work early on and throughout the whole campaign. But there's no other way that we could win that race, and there's no other way that we would run that race with Ted Cruz, because that is truly who Ted Cruz is. He may be a policy wonk, he may be wicked smart, but he is a conservative grassroots activist. And so we used that to our advantage and dominated the conservative base, and we definitely won that so-called sub-primary, where we were able to push everyone else out of the primary, and we were the conservative candidate that was challenging Lieutenant Governor David Dewhurst, sitting Lieutenant Governor of Texas, who then we were framing as the anti-grassroots candidate.
I think you raise a really good point, and that is how well your candidate's personality has to fit your campaign style. And I've seen a lot of people do this wrong, and obviously both Rick Perry, Wayne Christian, and Ted Cruz all did this very right. They made sure, and part of this is how well you know your consultant and your strategist, so they can help you craft a strategy that fits you. But they did a remarkably good job across the board of building their campaign style around their personality, something that fit and was very natural for them.
Definitely. We played to Ted Cruz's strength, and, Jason Johnson and John Drogan led a great campaign and utilized his talents, Ted Cruz's talents, his personal skills and speaking ability, and his ability to connect one-on-one with people. And we recognized that early on. And so we used that to our advantage. And we were going up against a candidate that respectfully did not always connect with the grassroots very well and did not always come across speaking as engaged as he truly is in a more private or personal setting. And so we used that to our advantage, and we ran with it, and we tried to define our opposing candidates, mainly with Lieutenant Governor David Dewhurst as not a grassroots candidate, not a fan of the grassroots, and scared, ducking the grassroots. We actually had a whole digital and grassroots campaign built around ducking Dewhurst. One of the things early on that we found out was happening was our Tea Party friends were doing straw polls and candidate forums all across the state, in the big cities and the small little towns. And we were going along with 5 or 6 other lesser candidates that didn't have the organization and the infrastructure and the fundraising and the skills that Senator Cruz did, but they were still viable candidates on the grassroots level. And so we were going around all across the state to all these grassroots forums, participating in these candidate forums and winning all these straw polls, which once again we realized early on that's a great setting for Ted Cruz to be up on a stage talking, being able to compare Ted Cruz, the candidate, to these other, couple candidates, talking on stage about the issues, about what they believe in, where they come from, and why they want to be our next U.S. Senator. And then the biggest thing also that helped us out was that David Dewhurst, our primary competitor, barely went to these events at all. So it was a great compare and contrast of Ted Cruz, the conservative grassroots candidate, going to all these grassroots forums and winning them, beating David Dewhurst in every single Republican straw poll that was held across the state of Texas. We beat David Dewhurst in every single one of them, from a Tea Party groups that might have leaned our way a little bit to more TFRW clubs or Republican clubs that might have been a little bit more favorable towards the sitting Lieutenant Governor of Texas. But we worked on turnout. We got to be the best in the business at straw poll turnout across the state, whether it was in Dallas or Houston or San Angelo. We knew how to motivate our people, get them out there and win those suckers. And most importantly, rather than winning the straw polls is great because it fed into the narrative of Ted being the conservative candidate and us, the grassroots rallying and choosing behind Cruz. But also, what was really important is at these forums, there are anywhere from 20 to 50 to a couple hundred people that were engaged activists from across the Republican Party, Big Tent platform. And so we got to go and put Ted Cruz in front of all of them and speak to them, and then we'd be working the room, getting signups and recruiting people left and right. And so it was a great opportunity to get Ted's message out all across the state in a relatively free way. It only cost us staff hours and gas money and fast food to get him there, so we didn't have to pay to do this or anything like that. So it was a great use of our resources, to get Ted and his message out all across the state. And it clearly defined who the grassroots conservative candidate was and who was literally ducking the grassroots.
All right, so both Perry, who wore the duck suit for Ducking Dewhurst of Ducking Dewhurst fame, and Drogan, who helped come up with the plan, have talked about the duck costume. I feel like you've got to give me some kind of story about how the Ducking Dewhurst icon came to be and how that played into the campaign.
Well, it was a fun and unique story. I think it was either Drogan's idea or Jason Johnson or maybe even Ted's idea to do this whole Ducking Dewhurst thing. And David Dewhurst was doing an event here in Austin at the Austin Club, a private club that all the political folks and lobbyists belong to. He was speaking, I believe it was to a Texas Tribune morning session with Evan Smith moderating it. So it was a big event. It was being live streamed. There's a whole bunch of the Austin insiders and some grassroots folks that are going there to hear from David Dewhurst speak. And so we had Josh Perry out in front of the Austin Club wearing a duck costume that we got from, I think Jorgen ordered it online or something because we couldn't find anyone here locally. I'm sitting there with a video camera recording everything, and one of our interns, Saul, who currently works in the Texas Capitol, he's probably not happy I'm mentioning this, was sitting there with a big poster board that said duckingdewhurst.com on it, trying to drive some attention to our splash page that was attacking the good lieutenant governor. And so we were outside, all these press and lobbyists and campaign hands, and Dewhurst and his staff are walking in, seeing us out there with a video camera, a sign, and some kid, poor Josh Perry, in a duck costume. And so once they all go in, the event starts. Then I go into the event. I had registered it was a free event open to the public. I had registered with the Texas Tribune to attend the event so I could watch and hear what Dewhurst said and report back to the campaign on it. And so I get in there. I got my little tracker video camera. I sit in the back, minding my own business, get it all set up. And then suddenly I get approached by some gentlemen wearing dark suits, ties, and earpieces, and the manager of the Austin Club kicking me out of the event because apparently I was not allowed to be in there filming it because, of course, we wanted to use it for opposition research purposes. And the lieutenant governor and his team did not want us in there doing it. So I got booted out of the Austin Club because we're there to film it, and it might have had something to do with the fact that we had a duck in front of the Austin Club as well, that the lieutenant governor had to walk past to get inside. And the most ironic part of it all is the Austin Club manager came to boot me out, and he was being backed up by the lieutenant governor's DPS security guys because they said, hey, there's someone who's not supposed to be here. It could be a threat. So they were just, being careful and taking precautions. And so one of the DPS guys that's backing up the manager comes up to me, hey, I'm sorry, you got to leave. They're all very nice, professional. And I knew the guy. I had known him from working on Governor Perry together. So we had done events together with Governor Perry that I was hosting for Perry back in 2010, and he was showing up to advance it from a security standpoint. I was like, hey, man, you know me. Like, I'm not causing any trouble. He's like, sorry, you got to go. So I got booted out of the Austin Club for trying to film an event by the own security guy that I used to work with. But it got into the press. It was a big blow up in the press a couple months later. But it was quite amusing, and I'm glad I did it, and I'm glad I got it all on video too.
That's great. The number of fun stories you get working these kind of jobs is truly impressive. So we talked a lot about the importance of how the grassroots played in your campaign, and that was, from Ted on down. Obviously, throughout the whole campaign, it was tied with his personality and what he wanted to communicate to the voters as part of the campaign strategy from his perspective of he knew that to beat the prohibitive favorite in money and name ID, he had to have a strong base among the grassroots, and they were his people. But you guys built an incredible team of folks across the state that helped build those relationships as well. It wasn't just those meetings with 5 people at a time. You guys developed a really, really great network of people across the state that were working as field staff and volunteers that built those up, helped turn all those folks to straw polls. That's not an easy thing to do, but you guys did it. I'm sure part of it had to do with your previous relationships across the state with Perry and with your other races. But how did you guys go about building that network?
Well, the previous relationships really helped, but it was just good old-fashioned hard grunt work. We engaged in a program called County Leadership Teams, where Drogan and Ted set the very high goal of trying to get a county leadership team in place in every single county across the state of Texas. That's 254 counties. And we came really darn close to doing that, but as you know, in some counties, there are very few Republican primary voters or no Republican primary voters because they don't host a Republican primary. But we went up, basically, we contacted our friends and our family, went through all of our employees' networks to try to find folks in these counties across the state, filling up Dallas County, Tarrant County, in Central Texas, Houston area counties. It was really easy. Well, not really easy, but it was relatively easy. It gets hard when you get to those mid-tier counties that are, have a population center, but not a big city. You might not have done an event there, ever in the past 2 years. And that's when it really took a lot of grunt work. And we just started, not using the phone book. We just started calling through any and all Republicans we could find through doing research online, through talking to, other friends that are in the business and just trying to get any list possible of conservatives, Republicans, pro-life folks, school choice folks, NRA folks, gun owners, things like that, where it could be a pre-existing constituent group or there is some sort of organizational structure already in place that we could tap into. And we ended up, through the hard work of our staff and our team, and Tyler Norris, who was on the campaign at that time, really helped out with this effort as well, where we produced county leadership teams in almost all the counties across the state. I think we covered something like 95% of the population of the state of Texas for the county leadership team. Over 1,000 people were on this county leadership team, and they were our eyes, our ears, and our boots on the ground in these respective counties. They would, number one, our small dollar donors. Number two, they would help us with the events on the ground. They would go to all of their local Republican clubs, their women's clubs, their tea parties, their chambers, their pro-life meetings, and talk about Ted Cruz. So we had, foot soldiers literally everywhere that our opponents could not match because they were a money-driven campaign where they're going to be on TV, on radio, and on the mail. We were doing all of that, but we were also doing the grassroots, and that's what really put us over the top. We weren't able to match them dollar for dollar on the spending-wise, on TV, on radio, on mail, and on digital as well. But we were able to match them and then blow them out of the water when it comes to grassroots. And so that's what we knew we had to do early on, and we set out to do it, and we did it successfully. But there's no magic bullet or secret weapon to doing grassroots well and developing a statewide grassroots network. You got to travel across the state with your candidate. You got to get them into as many meetings as possible. Then you got to do the hard follow-up work afterwards of following up with those folks and getting them to sign up and take leadership roles in your team. These folks were not just a name on a press release. That's what some of our opponents did. These folks were truly out there working for us every single day and week and month for the campaign, and that's why we were successful, because we empowered our grassroots and we gave them the tools and the information and the data possible so they could go out and contact their community and their friends and family on our behalf. And that's one struggle that I had in that campaign on pretty much every campaign I work on is the struggle of trying to balance the day-to-day, flood of your inbox from all your grassroots folks. If you're doing a grassroots-driven campaign, you're going to be getting a heck of a lot of phone calls, emails, and text messages from your leadership teams all across the state, or for that matter, all across the country, asking you for information, for responses, for pushback, or for yard signs or letters, whatever it may be. And so you have to make sure that your grassroots team, if you're a true grassroots candidate, is getting all the information they need. But you also have to make sure that you are moving forward in a steady, planned direction, and you don't just get so caught up in responding to every single email you got from your folks or answering every single call immediately. You have to make sure you're balancing that really well with providing all the information and being a responsive campaign from the top on down to your base, to your voters, to your undecided voters, and to your leadership teams, but also working with them and pushing them to make sure that we are all being productive and accomplishing our campaign goals that we set out to do. And so you could get lost in the world of making sure there's a yard sign in every single corner or making sure every single club received a packet of bumper stickers and push cards, right? Is that going to win you an election in the long term? It's not going to win that election for you in the long term. So you have to make sure you're balancing the needs of the grassroots also with the needs of your candidate and your campaign and using your time, your resources, and your funds wisely. And so So that's one of the most difficult things that I found was just managing your time correctly, managing your staff's time correctly, and managing your candidate's time correctly of being a grassroots candidate and being responsive to every single voter, every single contact that your campaign got, and making sure every single person that reached out got a response from you and got, within reason, got the information or the materials they're requesting. And so trying to, move your campaign forward every single day and do things proactively and productively for your campaign. And if that's a key and critical thing where you don't get caught up in the inbox game of responding to every single email or responding to every single tweet, is being responsive to your grassroots, being respectful of them, and being an open campaign that communicates freely both ways and listens to the grassroots and brings it all the way up, but also taking your campaign's goals and priorities and pushing those down and making sure that's being implemented in the field with your staff and with your grassroots.
And that's a very, very difficult balance to find. I mean, when you have that many grassroots leaders, all of which you know personally, many of which, if not all of which, know Ted personally because of the time he spent in the field, you build a relationship and they want to help. And a lot of these folks are incredibly active and incredibly passionate, and you can't always give them everything they want, but you have to work really hard to make sure they always feel that you appreciate them, that you value them, and that you're on the same team. That kind of cohesion is really critical. And you guys did a remarkable job of that, because when you don't have all the money and you can't give them all the bumper stickers and yard signs and the swag that they would like, you can't give them everything, even as far as information or as far as much as Ted's time or your time. There's a lot of resource allocation when you got 254 counties and all these different folks that you got to balance, and that's tough. I mean, how did you guys really work that?
Well, we invested heavily in our grassroots staff, full-time paid staff on the campaign. We had a big finance team and we had a big political and grassroots team. And so we made it a priority early on from the campaign that we wanted to be the most responsive campaign out there and the most grassroots campaign. And so it was our priority that Ted Cruz said at the top, that Jason Johnson and John Drogan said at the top, and that we said all within our respective roles, where, if the grassroots need something, if they're asking for information, if they say, hey, we got some good advice for you guys, you're not listening to us, we're going to sit down and listen to them and not just smile and nod. We're going to take notes and we're going to pass it along to Ted. Or even better, we give them the opportunity to do that in person next time we're in town. And so, we just made that decision early on that we were going to respect the grassroots and follow their lead. And if you want to be the grassroots candidate, you got to do those sorts of things. You can't do it halfway, because as we know, our friends in the grassroots, they are very smart. They see things happening, and this is not their first rodeo. So if we had tried to pretend we're being the grassroots candidate, they would have seen right through that, and we would not be looking at Senator Ted Cruz today.
Well, and that's something that serves you very well, and those relationships are still ongoing. I mean, in your time as Ted's outreach director on the state level, being one of the guys that I reported to, those relationships that you built, that I had, that our different RDs had across the state, that was a huge asset to us in terms of us getting our message out, but also having direct lines in across the state on the Senate side to know how well we were serving these groups across the state. Definitely.
And so that was one thing that was very unique about Senator Cruz's federal office. After the campaign ended, a lot of us that were either working for the campaign or were part of our grassroots leadership team in various roles, like yourself, moved over into Cruz's official federal office, representing Senator Cruz within their regions here in the state of Texas. And then also a lot of the guys and gals went up to D.C. to be our policy hands up in D.C. And so we had our staff, number one, had a very heavy tie to Texas. And number two, a very heavy tie to the conservative grassroots base in Texas, where our grassroots leaders knew, or our elected officials knew, hey, we can call Jon McClellan or John Drogan and get an answer out of them. Or even better, they can call Ted Cruz or our chief of staff in Washington, D.C. and get an answer out of them as well. And so that was one thing that we did. We were a very open and transparent office on the federal side, and that office still operates that way today, with trying to go out among the grassroots and making sure that they know and we're communicating to them what Senator Cruz's priorities are, what he's doing as a U.S. Senator for you today. And just as importantly, I would say more importantly, we were talking to the same grassroots leaders that got us elected and really helped us out. What are their priorities? What are they hearing in their communities that they want to see done on a federal level, where Ted Cruz can throw his weight around and help get that done for them? And so, that's why to this day we still do a ton of, Senator Cruz in his office still do a ton of grassroots roundtables and business roundtables and industry roundtables, where he can sit down in a private room, no press involved, no cameras, no recordings, and have a frank conversation one-on-one or with a small group of people about what is affecting their industry and how can I help you? How can I help you as your U.S. Senator? I don't care if you're a Republican, Democrat, didn't vote, never voted. How can I sit down and help you cut red tape in Washington or to help advance something that the state of Texas needs? And that's where that's why Ted Cruz is still one of the most loved and liked politicians here in the state, because he's responsive, he gives folks his ear, and then he doesn't just sit there and smile and nod. He actually goes and does something about it for him too.
And you brought up something that I think is really important. It's that once you're elected, Ted just didn't run to represent a couple million Republican voters or the 15 million registered voters here in Texas. It was for 26, not 27 million Texans across the state, all ages, races, everything. And so what he did in his direction from the top down in that Senate office where we served was that this is an open door thing. We're not talking about just the conservative grassroots, but we want to open up to basically anybody. And we both took a lot of meetings with Democrats, with liberals, all across the spectrum, with people of all different industries and backgrounds. That was something that the boss was very, very specific about. And what he had to do as the senator, as the guy, he had to be willing to do those as well. And that's one of the things I think a lot of people even disagree with Ted respect, is that he didn't just go into the friendly rooms. He went into the rooms with people that disagree with him, and he was willing to hear from them. And in that meeting, whether they agreed on the issue or not, they at least knew that he had listened, that it was sincere, and that he was going to take their opinions into account. It's something that not a lot of people do, but especially for our listeners that are thinking about running for office, you have to realize that this is not just about your base. This is about, once you get into office, this is about you having an open door to listen to people. It's not an easy thing. Sometimes it's quite unpleasant, but it's critical because that's your job. That's what you're running for. You got to make sure you do that job.
Yep, you represent all of your constituents, whether they voted for you or not, and that's what this job is really about, is working for the folks of your district and taking care of them and getting what they need done. It's not about R&D or independent or libertarian. It's about the mom and pop that live from you down the street that occasionally vote, are involved, but they're trying to take care of their own business and they're trying to succeed and get their version of the American dream. And typically it's our job as working for elected officials is to keep the government out of their way, right? We're all about small government. We're all about letting them live their lives and achieve their dream and trying to have the government have as little as an impact as possible on their version of the American dream.
I agree 100%. John, you've been really generous with your time, and we'll have to have you on another point, kind of like with Josh Perry, to talk about the presidential race specifically, because we could talk for hours on that. We spent a lot of time together on the road. Before we leave, though, I want to take a few minutes and talk about what you're doing now, because working with those grassroots leaders and working with the legislators in Austin, you're working to help from the public policy and the grassroots side to impact change there in Austin and throughout the state. Talk a little bit about what you guys do there at Public Blueprint and how you help shape things from the grassroots level statewide now.
Yeah, so I am the Director of Outreach for Public Blueprint. A name you've heard me say before in this interview is David White. David White and his wife Liz founded this firm. This is actually my third time working for David, so apparently we both keep going back for punishment. And another name you've heard before is Tyler Norris. And so Tyler has worked with me through various stages of the Cruz campaign, and then he's also working here at the firm. So it's kind of and Tyler also worked for Representative Wayne Christian back in the day for myself and David. So it's kind of the old team is all getting back together here in Austin under the banner of Public Blueprint. And so we are a public affairs firm that is based in Austin. I represent the Houston office of that as well. And what we do is public affairs, issue advocacy, government relations, lobby work, and we also have a full-scale digital arm as well. So we can handle all of your digital needs in-house, from website development to your social media, your content creation, content calendars, graphics, videos, all that fun stuff. And so one unique thing about our firm is that typically you are either a consulting firm, a digital firm, a press firm. You don't do everything in-house, right? We do all that in-house. So when a corporate client or an issue group is looking at trying to put together a public affairs campaign that's targeting the state legislator or targeting a city or something like that, they can call us and we can do it all for them, where they're not billing out to 3 separate people. You're getting 3 separate markups and 3 separate invoices, and there's a lot more transparency on your cost-wise if it's all done, with one firm. And also, we're saving them a lot of money as well because they're paying one firm instead of a couple. And we're a small firm, and so we're out there competing against some of the big guys, but being aggressive, being hungry, and taking the campaign tactics that we've all learned from from presidential politics and state politics, and applying that in more of a corporate or issue advocacy setting.
Well, one of the things that sets you guys apart is the fact that all of y'all come from campaign backgrounds. A
Yep.
lot of the people that do lobby work and government affairs work purely come out of staff side or out of lobby side jobs. And so you guys not only have the campaign experience to understand how that works, but you also have the grassroots contacts from across the state that enable you to really serve your clients in a pretty unique way.
Yeah, and so that's what makes us unique, though. We are all campaign guys that, it took us a couple of years, in my case a decade, in some other cases sooner than that, to realize that campaigns are great and awesome, but when you have a family to support, sometimes that lifestyle isn't the best long-term solution. So we all, realized over our own course of our lives that, hey, we can still work and operate in a campaign-style environment using those same skills and resources and network, but just applying it on behalf of a different type of client. Instead of Ted Cruz or Rick Perry or Wayne Christian, we're applying it for free market folks that are fighting to introduce more free market principles here in Texas. A great example of that is Tesla in Texas. That's one of the groups that we work for. Tesla is the American-made electric car company that Elon Musk runs, and what we're working on here in Texas for them is to allow a concept called direct sales to go in place here in Texas, where a car manufacturer can sell directly to the consumer if they choose so. So you don't have to go through a licensed and franchise auto dealer system where there's typically a markup, of maybe 5 or 6% of a markup, where the consumer, if they choose to, can go directly to the consumer and buy that car directly from them. And so what we're doing for Tesla is working all angles for them, working the grassroots side, going all across the state of Texas, speaking to folks, speaking to Republican clubs, Tea Party clubs, conservative clubs, car enthusiast clubs, things like that, trying to rally support and really build up a really big grassroots list and database. So now that we're in the Texas legislative session, we have about 70 plus days left right now. We just got 2 bills filed calling for direct sales here in Texas. State Senator Bob Hall, Tea Party favorite out of East Texas, and then State Representative Jason Isaac, who's a more senior member from Hays County, filed these 2 bills to allow for direct sales in Texas. And so now we are trying to, show the Texas legislators, the committee men, the leadership of the Texas House and Senate, and the governor. There are Texans all across the state that support this, and a lot of them happen to be, good conservative Republican primary goers that they will be seeing at their next town hall or at their next election. And a great example of a value add that we can provide is, with Tesla in Texas, not only have we been speaking across the state, but we also are working, the Republican Party of Texas process. And at the last state convention, the direct sales platform was added to the official platform of the Republican Party of Texas. And so now we, wearing our lobby hats or our government relation hats, can walk up to the Texas State Capitol and talk to our Republican members and say, not only is this a free market principle, but your conservative grassroots base who elect you every 2 years, who you have to go home and see, on Friday afternoon when you get out of Austin, when you're out of the bubble back home in your district, they care about this because they included that in the Republican Party of Texas platform. Over 10,000 delegates got together up in DFW and did that. And so, when that bill crosses your desk and you choose yes or no on it, are you choosing to support the Republican Party of Texas platform or are you not? To me, it's a simple question, but we'll see what happens in the next 75 days.
I definitely appreciate the fact that one of the consistent threads through your career, through David's career and Liz's, is that you guys are fighting for principle. We talk about that a lot on here because it's something that's very important to me, and that you've chosen to make that a priority, both in the campaigns you chose to work with, the organization you affiliate with, and now the types of clients you try to serve there in Austin. So I definitely appreciate that, and you deserve a lot of kudos for that because plenty of people in our line of work do not make that decision. So thank you for staying true to that, my friend.
Well, that is who we are, and we wouldn't be doing this if we didn't believe in it. And the day that I'm working for a candidate, an entity, a group that I don't personally believe in, is when you need to call me up and slap me around, Raz, and tell me to go find a new job.
I will, and the need is likewise. So to definitely do the same for me.
Will do.
So as we're wrapping up here, our listeners are primarily folks that are thinking about running for office, have run, or that are wanting to get involved in working in politics. We give them a lot of advice today. I think a lot of good stuff to think and really ponder. What kind of direct advice do you have for them to kind of wrap things up as far as next steps they should take when they're wanting to get into that game?
I would say I want to touch back on no job is too big or too small for you, whether it's you or that's a culture. If you want that culture in your campaign, whether you're running for city council, state rep, or governor or president, you have to set that from the top with how you act around your staff, how you act among, your base, your grassroots, and the people you hire and choose to put you around. As we like to say in the conservative world, personnel is policy. Who you hire truly matters. So make sure that whether you're hiring someone full-time or they're just volunteers, make sure you surround yourself with good people that are in it for the right reasons, that truly believe in back your principles, whatever they may be, to make sure that you're not being misled or led down a wrong road that you may regret once you get elected, or if you lose your race because you didn't stick to your principles. And stick to those principles, and no job is too big, no job is too small. If you are out there as the candidate block walking every Saturday and every Sunday after church, your staff is going to do that extra hard. Your volunteers will do that, and they'll want to do it. One of the first things I learned, interning for Van Taylor in his congressional race back in Waco when I was in Baylor, is we didn't block walk, we block ran. Van is a former Marine. He took pride in his work ethic and his ability, and so he would literally wear tennis shoes and he would block run all throughout Waco. And so us poor staff and volunteer would have to run in front of him or behind him and knock on the doors and get folks ready to talk to him.
That's
and
awesome.
then would run up to the house, give his pitch, drop some signs and literature, and literally run off to the next house. And so that was pretty inspiring to me as a college kid who could, was not in the best shape of his life, being in college, eating pizza every night, watching, this guy who's running for office wants to be a U.S. congressman out there literally in his workout clothes, in professional clothes, but his workout shoes, running house to house, talking to neighbors in Waco, Texas. And, small things like that really set a really strong example, and lead by example, and, all things will do well, win or lose.
I love it, John. Thank you so much for being generous with your time and joining us today. I hope folks will get a lot of good stuff at it. We're going to have all of your contact information, Twitter and Facebook, LinkedIn, all in the show notes. So if you want to connect with John, go check those out, and I'm sure he'd be happy to talk with you. He definitely makes plenty of time for me to bend his ear, and Twitter's always a good place to reach out to him. Thank you so much for joining us today, and make sure you check out campaignsidekick.vote to find out about our sponsor. Check out the show notes for more information about what we talked about today, and we'll talk to you again next week.
Please subscribe and rate us on iTunes to help spread the word. We'll be back with you next week with more campaign insights from My Campaign Coach.